My sister screamed in court, but when I placed a paper on the judge's desk, he said only 3 words. When I pulled up to the driveway, it was like my feet didn't quite want to move. I hadn't been here in years, not since before the deployment that turned into decades. But the roof still sloped the same way, the hedges still grew too high against the porch railing, and the tree I carved my initials into back in '92 was still there, only thicker now. The house looked smaller than I remembered, like time had squeezed the life out of it while I was gone. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, boots crunching over gravel that should have felt familiar but didn't. Claire was already outside. I hadn't even made it to the porch when she spotted me, her face tightening the moment our eyes met. She didn't speak right away, just narrowed her eyes and reached for her phone. "You need to leave," she said, not even blinking. "I'm calling the cops." I froze. "Claire, it's me. Naomi." "No," she snapped. "You don't belong here. This isn't your home anymore." Before I could say anything else, she was walking toward the street, muttering into the phone. I glanced up at the living room window, where the curtains shifted, and I saw the outline of someone peering out. My father. He just stood there, motionless, staring through the glass like I was a stranger on the other side of a two-way mirror. I raised my hand. He didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked, and then he was gone. The front door never opened. I stayed on the sidewalk until the police arrived, just to avoid making things worse. The officers were polite but firm, asked for ID, confirmed my name, then told me I had no legal claim to the property. Claire, it turned out, had the title. I was no longer on it. They said something about a transfer that had happened last year. Paperwork filed, signatures on record. I didn't hear most of it. I was staring at the house, wondering how the hell I had disappeared from it without anyone telling me. I didn't fight it. I just nodded and left. I drove a few miles until I found a gas station with a half-lit parking lot and parked under one of the lights. The air inside the car was too quiet. My duffel sat in the passenger seat, still zipped, still heavy with everything I own now. Uniforms, discharge papers, a single photo of my mother from before she passed, and a coin I'd carried through Iraq, Afghanistan, Germany, and back again. I reclined the seat and stared at the ceiling. I tried to remember what the kitchen used to smell like when Dad made toast and burned it just enough that Mom would swear under her breath and wave a dish towel at the smoke alarm. Tried to remember if Claire used to laugh more when we were little, if she ever called me Nay, like Mom did. It was hard to picture now. Sleep came in broken patches, and when the sun started to bleed into the windshield, I sat up and wiped condensation off the glass. I needed coffee and a bathroom and some kind of plan. I pulled out my phone, checked for any missed messages, not that I expected any, and saw a real estate alert instead. The house. My house. Listed for sale. Bright red banner across the top. New listing. Price to move. I stared at it for a long time. The photo was taken just days ago. Same porch. Same tree. Same chipped paint on the banister I fell off of when I was 10. I zoomed in. The bedroom window still had the crooked screen I bent sneaking out in high school. They didn't even fix it. They just scrubbed me out, put the place on the market, and moved on. It wasn't grief that hit me. It wasn't even anger. It was something flatter, something hollow. A realization that I had made it through cyber ops and combat zones and bureaucratic black holes for 25 years only to come home and find out that home had rerouted itself like I was a bad connection. I wasn't angry that they changed the locks. I was angry that nobody thought I'd ever come back. Ruth met me at this little place off Main we used to go to in high school, one of those coffee shops that somehow still had the same peeling linoleum counters and yellowed newspaper clippings in the windows. I hadn't seen her in years, not since before the army swallowed me whole, but she looked the same, older around the eyes, maybe a little more tired in the shoulders, but still Ruth, sharp as ever, with that practiced calm she always had when things went sideways. She brought her briefcase, which told me this wasn't just a friendly catch-up. We hugged, stiff, cautious, and sat in the back near the windows, away from the early lunch crowd. I hadn't even touched my tea when she opened the folder. "Naomi," she said, voice low, eyes scanning my face the way lawyers do when they're bracing you for something you're not ready to hear. I looked into the house. She slid a copy of a deed across the table. My name was there. My signature too. Only problem was, I didn't sign a damn thing. It didn't even look like my handwriting. They tried to mimic it, sure, the same looping in, the line that always slants too far up when I rush, but it was off. Anyone who knew me would have spotted it. But whoever did this counted on no one looking too closely. The house was sold 4 months ago, Ruth said, flipping to the next page. Transferred to an LLC called Raven Holdings. Cash deal. No mortgage. She paused, gave me this look like she already knew what I was going to ask. The notary on the paperwork? Gary Madsen. Ring any bells? I shook my head slowly. Should it? She gave a tight sigh. No. Because he doesn't exist. Not in the way he should. His license was suspended last year. He's under federal investigation for document fraud. And get this, they've connected him to 5 other cases just like yours. I just stared at the paperwork, at my name forged in ink on a document that erased me from the only place I had left. My stomach turned. So they stole it, I said quietly. They stole my goddamn house. Ruth nodded. Yeah, and they tried to make it look clean. Filed everything through an escrow company in Maryland that's already been shut down. The LLC? It's registered offshore. Shell company. No physical address. No contact info. Someone wanted this untraceable. I leaned back, trying to breathe, trying not to let the burn behind my eyes take over. Claire signed off on this. She didn't have to, Ruth said. Not with this signature here. They made it look like you agreed to the sale. As far as the system's concerned, you authorized everything. That's why the cops told you to leave. I don't know how long I stared at that page. I wasn't just erased. I was forged out of my own life, like someone had gone in and scrubbed me out of the margins and replaced me with a ghost who nodded and signed on the dotted line. I felt stupid for not realizing it sooner, for standing in front of my childhood home like some lost veteran who thought she could just walk back into the life she left behind. The whole time, they were already packaging it up and selling it to ghosts. I can file an injunction, Ruth said, voice calm but clipped. Try to freeze the title, but it won't be easy. These people, whoever's behind Raven Holdings, they're professionals. They don't leave fingerprints. I nodded slowly, still trying to wrap my head around it. So what now? She hesitated, then leaned in. Now? We dig. We find out who's behind this. And we make damn sure they regret picking the wrong woman to disappear. Ruth called me just after midnight, her voice tight and low like she was trying not to wake someone on the other end of her life. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Something's wrong with the house, she said. I pulled utility data, don't ask how, and the energy usage has tripled in the last 6 weeks. Triple, Naomi. That's not normal. Especially not for an empty house. I was sitting in the front seat of my car again, same spot in the gas station parking lot where I'd been sleeping, same crumpled paper cup of cold coffee in the holder. I hadn't said a word yet. My brain was trying to keep up, trying to draw a line between power bills and forged documents and the way Claire hadn't even looked at me when she called the cops. Ruth kept going. I cross-referenced with the county records. No official renovations filed, no tenant agreements. And the basement? It's drawing more current than the rest of the house combined. That's industrial equipment level power. I felt something settle in the pit of my stomach. Not panic exactly, not fear. More like the moment before a breach when your gut tells you the room's going to go hot, but there's no backing out. You think someone's using it for something. I think someone already is, she said. And it's not legal. She was right. I didn't have to ask how she knew, or why she sounded like she hadn't slept. It was the same tone I used to hear in briefings, just before a sting went sideways. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat in the dark with the engine off, watching the steam curl from my breath against the windshield, replaying every second in that yard. Claire's face. My father's vacant stare. That house with the lights on, but nobody home. The note showed up the next morning, wedged under the wiper blade like some cheap flyer. Only it wasn't printed. Sloppy handwriting, blocky letters in fading blue ink. Alley behind Booker's. 9 p.m. Come alone. No signature. No contact. Just that. I stared at it for a full minute before folding it in half and tucking it into my jacket. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I'd been in worse places with worse odds. Booker's was the kind of bar that didn't ask questions, the kind with a gravel lot in the back and a flickering sign that buzzed like a bad fuse. I parked a block away and walked the rest, boots crunching over debris, every instinct on alert. The alley was narrow, cluttered with trash bins and delivery crates, and smelled like spilled beer and motor oil. He was already there when I turned the corner, a tall, thin guy in a flannel jacket, hoodie pulled up under a worn ball cap, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Ethan. I remembered him now. Lived 2 houses down from us growing up, always messing around with bikes and dirt trails in the woods. He used to sell candy out of his backpack at the bus stop. He looked older now, more tired, with deep lines around his eyes and a mouth that didn't smile much anymore. He nodded once when he saw me, then looked over his shoulder like he expected someone to be listening. You Naomi? He asked, like he didn't already know. Yeah. He rubbed his jaw. Didn't think you'd come. I got your note. He exhaled like he'd been holding it in all day. I shouldn't be doing this. I've got kids. A job. But you deserve to know what they're doing. My pulse kicked up. Who? Claire's husband. Brian. He spat the name like it tasted bad. For the last couple months, he's been showing up after midnight with trucks. Not U-Haul stuff. Big box trucks, unmarked, no plates on half of them. Every Thursday. Like clockwork. Back up the drive. Roll into the garage. Unload for hours. I've seen it. My security camera caught the taillights. But it's the basement. That's where they're storing it. I know it. What are they moving? I asked. He shook his head. No idea. Whatever it is, they cover it with tarps and move fast. I tried to ask Claire once, and she laughed it off. Said he was doing some side business in antiques. But antiques don't need power like that. Antiques don't come in unmarked pallets with no return address. My hands were cold, not from the wind. You call the cops? They don't care. Said unless I had proof of stolen property or drugs, it wasn't their business. And since the house is technically his now, or, well, Raven Holdings or whatever shell company he's hiding behind, they can't even search without a warrant. The silence between us stretched. Somewhere down the alley, a dog barked once, sharp and fast. Ethan shifted on his feet. Look, he said finally, eyes darting back toward the main road. I don't want trouble. I just thought you should know. Whatever's going on in that house, it's not right. And you, he hesitated. You didn't deserve what they did to you. He walked away before I could say anything else, leaving me standing in the middle of that cracked alley, the wind whistling past broken fences and dumpsters that hadn't been emptied in weeks. The streetlights above flickered once, then steadied, casting the house I grew up in. Now someone else's hiding place. In a pale yellow glow I didn't recognize anymore. I didn't know what Brian was moving, or how deep this thing went, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. That house was a lie, and I was done standing outside of it. I waited 3 more days, watching from the edge of that dead-end street like I used to watch surveillance feeds in Kandahar. No sudden movements, no drawn attention, just long hours parked behind tinted glass with the engine off and my eyes fixed on the house that used to be mine. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, but the rhythm was different now. Fewer porch lights, more drawn blinds. Like the whole block was in on something, or trying not to be. The vent on the side of the house near the basement was old, warped metal just above the crawl space, still covered with the same rust-streaked grill I remembered cleaning out as a kid when my father insisted everyone earns their keep. It was perfect, angled just enough to catch the noise bouncing off the concrete walls inside. I waited until just past 3 in the morning, slipped around the side of the house with gloves and a hoodie pulled low, and wedged the digital recorder into the corner where the vent met the siding. Taped it flat with a strip of black duct tape, nothing fancy, nothing high-tech. Just enough to catch sound without drawing eyes. I didn't sleep that night. Just stared at the ceiling of my car, palms pressed to my temples, heart hammering like I was back in some comms truck halfway across the world listening for voices in a language I barely spoke. Only this time the language was mine. The betrayal was mine. When I came back just after dawn, the device was gone. Not pulled loose. Gone. Tape peeled clean, surface wiped. Like it had never been there at all. But I had set it to upload a backup to my encrypted drive the moment the battery dropped below 20%. It hadn't finished, not all of it, but enough had made it through before they found it. I opened the file in Ruth's office, where we were supposed to be reviewing legal options, but instead just sat in silence listening to muffled sounds filtered through metal and insulation. Boxes being moved. The sharp grind of a dolly against concrete. Low voices, unhurried, practiced. Then the sound that made my skin go cold. I said no one talks to her. My father's voice, clear, steady, with that low gravel edge I hadn't heard in years but would have recognized even through 10 feet of steel. If she finds out, cut off contact. Completely. I don't care who has to do it. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared at the wall like if I blinked too fast the words would disappear. Ruth froze too. She didn't need to ask if I was sure. It was his voice. No doubt. I'd grown up with it in my ears like a second heartbeat. The man who taught me how to patch drywall and shoot straight and never show weakness. The man who stood at the window and looked right through me like I was a ghost in my own bloodline. He was in on it. He'd been in on it the whole time. The rest of the recording cut off just as another man laughed, short, bitter, and someone said, "She's still sniffing around? That's her mistake." And that's when it hit me. They hadn't just taken my house. They'd watched me come back. They knew I was getting close. And now they knew I was listening. I leaned back in the chair, the office spinning just a little, the fluorescent light overhead buzzing like it was mocking me. Ruth was already reaching for her backup drives, for the external, for anything we could move off the cloud. But I knew what came next. I'd seen it before. You don't cover your tracks this thoroughly unless you're prepared to erase the problem. And now I wasn't just a problem. I was exposed. I was discovered. And I was running out of time. The message came in while I was waiting in line at a gas station, standing under humming fluorescence that made everything feel harsher than it already was. Just 7 words. Plain text, no name. I have your psychiatric report. No punctuation, no sender ID, just a gray bubble on a screen that suddenly felt too small and too bright in my hand. My throat tightened in that way it does when your body remembers danger before your mind catches up. It wasn't just a threat. It was leverage. I'd been through mandatory evals during deployment, standard procedure after my third tour, and again after the cyber breach op that went sideways in Germany. Nothing disqualifying, nothing unstable. Just pages and pages of someone else's words summarizing my trauma like it was a spreadsheet. Clinical language for things I didn't say out loud. Insomnia, hypervigilance, memory fog, suppressed grief. You hand that kind of file to someone with bad intentions, and they'll twist it until you're unrecognizable, even to yourself. I didn't respond. I just stood there with a bottle of water sweating in my hand, trying to decide whether to walk out or smash the phone into the counter. I did neither. I paid. I got in the car. I drove. When he called, he didn't even bother pretending it was a coincidence. Just said he wanted to talk, that it'd be better in person, and gave me a time and a place like I worked for him. Like I was still part of the machine he'd built with silence and intimidation. He picked a park on the edge of town, one of those places with weather-worn benches and a pond that reflected too much sky. I got there early, parked 2 rows over, and watched him walk across the lot like he didn't have a care in the world. Same posture, same press shirt, and belt like he was going to church or a board meeting. He didn't look at me when he sat down beside me. Just stared ahead at the water like this was all some routine errand. "I know what you're doing," he said after a minute. "And I need you to understand something. Your return, it's inconvenient. You've complicated things that were already settled." I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I just watched the side of his face while he carefully avoided looking at mine. "You think this is about a house," he continued. "But this is about more than that. Your sister and Brian, they're just part of it. You showing up, poking around, pulling threads, that wasn't supposed to happen." I turned slowly, every muscle locked to keep from showing what I felt. "You don't even deny it." He gave a slight shrug. "What's there to deny? You left. For 25 years, you lived a life none of us could follow. You saw things we couldn't understand. And now you come back and want to reclaim something that doesn't exist anymore. This family, we moved on. By forging my name?" I asked. He still wouldn't look at me. Things needed to be handled. That house, it was always a liability. I don't know what hurt more, the quiet cruelty in his voice or the complete lack of shame behind it. There was no remorse, no guilt, just cold logic from a man who once tucked me in and taught me how to tie a tourniquet in the garage because a girl should know how to handle herself. "What about the will?" I asked. "Grandpa's house. His legacy. The one he promised I'd never lose." He looked down then, finally, for just a second. "You were gone," he said. "We didn't think you'd come back. And when you did, we didn't know what to do with you." It wasn't an apology. It was an admission, wrapped in cowardice. I left without another word. Drove until the town disappeared behind trees and silence. When I got back to Ruth's place later that night, there was a small package waiting for me on the porch. No return address, hand-delivered. I brought it inside, sliced the tape with a dull blade, and unfolded the papers with shaking hands. It was the will. The original. My grandfather's signature, unmistakable, firm, slanted, written with the same pen he used to balance his checkbook at the kitchen table every Sunday. My name was there, clear as day, full beneficiary of the property, effective upon his death. No amendments. No redactions. Just what he always told me, now confirmed in ink. Ruth read it twice, then looked up at me. "This changes everything." But all I could think was, they knew. They knew I was named. And they buried it anyway. Lied. Faked. Erased. And now they were trying to scare me quiet with old medical records and weaponized shame. I had the proof now. But what I didn't have, what I never really had, was a family. Just the hollow sound of my father's voice in my head, still echoing through that park bench conversation, as if he could just strip the truth down to paperwork and say it wasn't personal. But it was. It always had been. The breakthrough came not from a smoking gun, but from a government website Ruth's paralegal shouldn't have had access to in the first place. Some old procurement archive that hadn't been updated in years, buried behind 5 clicks and an outdated SSL certificate. It was a dead-end link for most people, but Ruth had trained her team to dig the way I'd been trained to track signals behind enemy fire. Relentless, meticulous, and patient. That night, she called me just before 2 a.m., her voice tight, with that same controlled urgency I'd heard the day she told me my name had been forged off my own deed. "Naomi," she said, "we found it. Raven Holdings isn't just a front. It's a gateway. It opens up access to at least 9 closed federal investigations, all involving shell companies with defense procurement ties. The names aren't always the same, but the structures are identical. Dummy boards, empty LLCs, bulk transfers out of federal contractor accounts to civilian entities. And Brian's name is on half of them." My body went cold. Not the kind of cold from weather, but the kind that settles into your bones when you realize the story is much bigger than you thought it was. Brian wasn't just a greedy husband laundering stolen family property. He was knee-deep in something that reached beyond the boundaries of our lives, beyond the house and the betrayal and the will. He'd been running operations through layers of legal fog, and no one had connected the dots until now. Ruth kept going, flipping through digital records on her screen while I listened to the quiet clicking of her mouse over the phone like each sound was another nail in someone's coffin. There are transfers from at least 3 shell firms: Orion Capital, Kingsway Supply Chain, and Marwood Holdings, all routed through intermediary banking nodes that ultimately lead to a handful of personal accounts. One of them is in Claire's name. Another's in a joint account between Claire and your father. I didn't respond. I couldn't. She exhaled. We pulled the wire data. Claire received over $290,000 across 6 months. All unitemized. All flagged as non-taxable distributions from consulting and real estate. And the signatures authorizing those wire releases? Same exact script as the forged deed. Same angle. Same pressure slant. Our handwriting analyst didn't even have to look twice. The silence between us felt loaded. Ruth didn't fill it, and I didn't ask her to. I sat in my car, engine off, phone pressed against my ear, and stared out at the dim horizon of a town that didn't want me back. This wasn't just about a family betrayal anymore. This was systemic. This was criminal. And Claire, my sister, the one who'd called the police on me before she even heard me speak, was a knowing participant in it. They'd used the house as cover. They'd used my name as camouflage. And the entire time I was out there serving, trusting the government and the flag and the blood-colored oaths we all took, they were back here turning my home into a money laundering machine. My father, my sister, her husband, all of them signing away pieces of a legacy that was never supposed to be theirs. Ruth paused, then said something that didn't surprise me. Not really. The feds are reopening the old cases. Quietly. They've already issued subpoenas for the shell corporations. No arrests yet, but it's only a matter of time. I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see it. My throat was tight, like every word I might say had teeth. This wasn't closure. Not yet. But it was the first clean line of truth in a story I'd spent my whole life trying to understand. And now that I had it, I wasn't letting go. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning, just after sunrise, when the courthouse was still half asleep and the halls still smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Ruth had been up all night finalizing the exhibits, pages of bank transfers, scanned copies of forged documents, my grandfather's will with his real signature, and 3 signed statements from experts in handwriting analysis, real estate fraud, and federal procurement. We walked through security with boxes in our arms, and the kind of silence between us that only exists when 2 people know exactly what they're walking into. We weren't bluffing. We weren't speculating. We were going to war. The complaint hit hard and clean, civil and criminal, with motions for immediate injunctive relief and asset freezes tied to the names of Claire, Brian, and my father. We named Raven Holdings, Marwood, Kingsway, and every corporate shadow they had hidden behind. We laid out a timeline so detailed it could have been used for an intelligence briefing. Every dollar trail, every falsified signature, every note, every voice clip, and every cross-reference timestamp. Ruth's team made sure the language was airtight, but I recognized the aggression beneath the legal polish. It was personal now, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever watched someone erase them and call it paperwork. By noon, federal subpoenas were issued. Claire was served first, at her office, in front of her co-workers, right after her lunch break. She tried to claim it was a mistake, that there had to be a misunderstanding, but the look on her face told a different story. She knew exactly what it was about. She knew the mask had cracked. Brian's came next, hand-delivered by 2 agents from the DOJ White-Collar Crimes Unit. They didn't knock twice. They didn't need to. My father was served the following morning, while sitting in the same church pew he used to drag us to every Sunday. I imagine the way he must have looked, upright, stiff, jaw locked, when the paper landed in his lap. I doubted he moved for a while after that. Then the freeze orders started coming down. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, property holdings, everything tied to their names, or anything discovered within their financial reach, was locked within 48 hours. That included the house. My house. The one they used like a stage for their little operation. The one they gutted behind forged ink and cowardly silences. A legal hold was placed on the property title pending full review, and a federal investigator was assigned to monitor any attempted transfers or concealed transactions. The same house Claire had kicked me off of for trespassing now sat under federal seal like a crime scene, which, in every practical sense, it was. I stood across the street when they changed the locks, not quietly, not in secret. A federal marshal accompanied the locksmith, and the whole block pretended not to look. I didn't flinch when Claire came out yelling. She knew it was over. She just didn't know how much damage it would take before the ground stopped shifting. And for the first time in years, I felt the floor under my feet start to settle. Not because it was done. It wasn't. Not even close. But because this time, they didn't get to erase me. This time, my name wasn't missing. It was on every page, every filing, every motion. Not as a witness, not as a victim, but as the one taking it all back. The courtroom was colder than I expected, too quiet and too bright. The kind of place where sound feels heavier and truth hangs in the air long after it's spoken. I sat at the witness table with my palms flat against the wood, steadying myself like I used to before walking into a classified briefing. Only this time, I wasn't representing a unit or a mission. I was representing the truth they tried to bury with signatures and silence. They called me by my full name, Naomi Elise West. I stood, raised my right hand, swore the oath with a voice that didn't waver, and walked forward like I belonged there. Ruth gave me a nod, small and precise, and I took my seat. The judge looked over his glasses at me and asked me to begin. I started with the documents, the forged deed, the falsified notary seal, the papers that transferred ownership of the house without my consent. I told them how I found out, how Ruth pulled the title records and traced the sale to Raven Holdings, how the signature on the transfer document wasn't mine even though it was written in my name. I described what it was like standing in front of the house I grew up in and being told by police that I was trespassing on land that had once been mine, and how my sister, Claire, stood on the porch with a straight face and said I didn't belong. I explained how it wasn't just a house. They had used my identity in military procurement filings, my service record folded into federal defense contracts through Bryan Shell companies. I walked the court through the transfers, the money wired into Claire's personal accounts labeled as real estate services and consulting, the same period when I was stationed overseas, with no knowledge or involvement. Ruth entered the bank records into evidence and placed a copy of my grandfather's original will on the overhead projector. My name, my inheritance, my legacy, stripped clean while I wore the uniform they used as a cover. Then came the recording. The audio played out over the courtroom speakers, grainy but unmistakable, the clatter of boxes, the mechanical hum of basement fans, and then his voice. My father's voice. If she finds out, cut off contact. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that tightens around your chest because everyone knows they've just heard something they weren't supposed to. The defense tried to recover, Claire's attorney leaning forward with a careful smile and calling the entire situation a tragic family misunderstanding, saying there was no malicious intent, that families go through difficult times and sometimes paperwork gets messy. He talked about emotional wounds, about grief, about my long absence and the strain it had placed on everyone. He even suggested that perhaps I had misinterpreted the situation, that I was angry and confused after a difficult transition home. I didn't look at him. I looked straight at the judge. This isn't a misunderstanding, I said clearly, evenly, like I was giving a report. This was planned. This was structured. And this was executed over months, possibly years, while I was in active service. My identity wasn't just misused. It was monetized. My inheritance wasn't lost. It was stolen. And my family didn't just stand by. They participated. Ruth submitted the signature analysis again, followed by the subpoenas from the Department of Justice, the financial trail connecting Claire and Bryan to federal contractors through front companies. The judge asked no questions. He didn't need to. By the end of testimony, the court ordered the initiation of full criminal proceedings, conspiracy to commit fraud, financial abuse, forgery, and federal identity misuse. Claire, Bryan, and my father would all be tried separately, pending indictment. The assets remained frozen. The deed was returned to the estate for legal review. And my name, my real name, was reinstated in the official records. I walked out of that courtroom the same way I walked into it. Shoulders back, head high. But this time, I wasn't carrying their silence. I left it behind on the record for everyone to hear. The news of the charges spread fast, faster than I expected for something buried in court dockets and federal records. But maybe that's just how it works when the fall is this public. Claire didn't say a word to me, not directly, not officially, but I knew exactly how she felt when I saw the family's social media profiles. Photos from holidays, graduations, birthdays, all still there. Only now I wasn't in any of them. Cropped, blurred, erased. A whole digital archive rewritten like I'd never existed. Her version of damage control was clean and cowardly, whitewashed nostalgia with my name scrubbed out like I was some embarrassing footnote she was trying to forget. Bryan, on the other hand, started turning on her the second the subpoenas hit. His attorney filed a statement accusing Claire of hiding financial transfers and misleading him about the ownership of the house. Said she withheld key estate documentation and had a pre-existing agenda regarding the inheritance. Claire's counsel responded the next day with a motion that described Brian as the orchestrator of a sophisticated fraud operation and claimed she was manipulated through emotional and financial dependence. Neither of them realized that it didn't matter who threw the match once the house was already on fire. The final blow came from a folder I almost forgot I had. 7 years ago, when I was home on emergency leave after a convoy attack in Kuwait, my grandfather asked me to help him transfer some old files from his camcorder to a thumb drive. He never really trusted cloud backups. He said if it wasn't something you could hold in your hand, it didn't exist. I never opened the files again. I kept them in an encrypted archive on an old hard drive that had followed me through 3 assignments and 2 continents. I only plugged it in out of instinct, not even knowing what I was looking for. The video started grainy, his face too close to the lens, adjusting the angle, fumbling with the buttons the way he always did. He was sitting at the dining room table, the house quiet in the background, and the date stamp in the corner read March 2nd, 2016. I want to make this plain, he said, voice calm, hands folded in front of him. This house goes to Naomi. She's the only one I trust to keep it standing. This isn't about favoritism. It's about respect. I've told Claire. I've told everyone. If they try to change it later, it's a lie. This is my will. Ruth watched it with me in silence, then made 3 copies and had the original certified by a forensic analyst. When we submitted it to the judge, it didn't just support the paper trail. It closed the door on any version of the story where Claire could claim confusion or omission or emotional fog. The will was genuine. The money trail was documented. The voices were recorded. The faces were all on file. And now the man whose name they used to justify their theft had spoken from beyond the grave with perfect clarity. The judge didn't even hesitate. Trial date expedited. All motions to delay denied. Full federal prosecution confirmed. And just like that, the structure they built, contract by contract, lie by lie, collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance. No more stories. No more revisions. Just the cold, legal shape of truth, carved deep and undeniable. The fall wasn't loud. It was clinical. It was final. And it was earned. The sentencing took place in a packed courtroom that felt more like a vacuum than a space. Every breath measured, every movement watched, every seat filled with people pretending they weren't waiting to watch a family finally snap in half. The judge read the decisions without flourish, without emphasis, like he'd long grown tired of people who thought they were smarter than the law. Claire sat in silence as he gave her 6 years. No emotion, no tears, just her hands clasped so tightly in her lap, I thought her knuckles might snap. Brian flinched visibly when the judge said 8. His lawyer whispered something to him, and he didn't nod, just stared forward like the ground had given way beneath him. And when it came to my father, 10 years, no parole, he didn't even blink. He just exhaled through his nose, like he'd already been serving it in his head for months. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the rush people talk about when they imagine revenge wrapped in courtroom decorum. What I felt was clean. Not relief. Not closure. Just something stripped bare and made true in front of strangers who had no reason to care, but listened anyway. I walked out of the courthouse without looking back. I didn't wait for Claire to call after me, didn't pause to see if my father turned his head one last time. I didn't need anything from them. Not now. Not anymore. Weeks later, I stood at a quiet ceremony held in a steel and granite lobby in Arlington, where my name was etched into the memorial wall of the U.S. Security Service. A permanent recognition of my service, of my record, of my clearance level, of my years held in silence behind classified missions and long, lonely corridors. They engraved it just below the name of a man I served with in Bahrain who didn't make it home. I traced the letters with my fingertips and didn't cry. I didn't go back to the house. I didn't need to.